think that's just my heart for women is it doesn't matter where you choose to give birth. Obviously, I think home birth is amazing and an incredible experience that everyone should just at least look into. But no matter what you choose, just knowing that, God has made our bodies as women to do this. Like, this is a huge part of what we were created to do. Not the only thing, but a huge part of it, to give life to the next generation and to sustain that life, and just to trust and believe that God has given us everything that we need and he has created us for this. And then just to not be afraid to speak up for the things that matter to you, and to ask those questions and to kind of seek after that experience that you're desiring that is natural childbirth. And I think there's just, it's so possible for everyone.
Welcome to the Salt Podcast, where we talk about all things simple. Yep, simple anointed living tips. I'm your host, Jenny Peña. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Salt Podcast. I have a very special guest that I'm so excited to talk about home birth with. So thank you so much, Nicole, for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, this is so special. My first time ever being interviewed for a podcast. So inaugural experience.
Well, there's no notes. We're just gonna have a conversation. So I hope that it's a really good first experience for you.
I'm sure it'll be amazing.
So I found you because I'm also in Young Living, and I saw that you had your home births, and I was like, oh my goodness, I love home births. We had home births, so I just had to have you on here. So thank you. I know birth is such a sacred thing. So I just feel like, wow, thank you so much for putting yourself out there and sharing what it's been like for you. But I guess before we dive into it, can you just give like a little gist of who you are and what you do, what you guys have been up to?
Yeah, so my name's Nicole Neesby. I am the oldest. I always like to go back to kind of my family story a little bit because I feel like it ties in so much to where I am now. But I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I grew up in the Midwest, like in Iowa and Illinois. And interestingly, talking about home birth, my mom had the first 3 of her kids, so myself and then my brother and my sister that are just younger than me. She had them in the hospital and then decided to venture into home birth. And that was like in the early 90s, I guess. And I was 4 years old, I think 4 or 5, when my mom had her first home birth, and she let my sister and I like be part of that, like in a small way, like watching our little brother be born. And then my mom went on to have her 4 youngest all at home. So that's kind of my background, I guess, with home birth. But anyway, so I grew up in the Midwest. I was homeschooled for all 12 years. And then after I graduated from school, I got involved with a nonprofit that run summer camps for orphans in China. And so I started going to different cities in China and being involved with that in the summers. And that's where I met my husband. He is from Los Angeles, totally opposite like life story from me. He has one twin brother. He grew up in LA going to Disneyland, life on the beach. He lived in Hawaii. We kind of like joke about that. Like, somebody had to suffer for the Lord in Hawaii for a couple of years. So he did that. And then his family moved back to, moved back to Los Angeles. And then we met in China and we dated long distance, got married in 2011. So we just celebrated 10 years, which is so bizarre.
Congrats.
It just does not feel like 10 years. Thank you.
Wow.
And it's so, time is such a strange thing, like how it can feel like forever, but also go so quickly. So anyway, I got married in Iowa and then got pregnant around our first anniversary, and that kind of just started our family life. And so we have 4 little kids now, and actually had my first miscarriage a year ago. So 5 babies in total, 1 waiting for us in heaven, 4 here.
Amen.
So that's kind of, and now we live through like a crazy series of events. We live in Ensenada, Mexico right now. So that brings us up to speed.
Wow, what a story. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Before we hit record, I gave you my little, long story short, but
Yeah.
dang, your story is like how I like pray that's how my children, grow up, like they're
Mm,
homeschooled and they can say, they saw their mommy, give birth and be a
yeah,
part of home birth. That's amazing. And
it
then
is.
meeting
It's
your
like,
husband in China. We lived in
yeah.
Beijing for we were there 7 months before all this fiasco started.
No
And then
way.
we came to Thailand. But yeah, we were there for 7 months. My
Yeah.
husband was teaching there. But yeah, and we've also
Wow.
almost been married for 10 years too. So
That's cool.
that's
That's so many
crazy.
similarities.
Yeah. So okay, so you mentioned about your first pregnancy. Like, did you already know you guys were like gonna try for home births, or how was that planning going for you guys
Yeah.
for the first time?
Yeah, so dynamics for my husband and I. So, like I said, we grew up like polar opposite. Anything like just him being in the big city, public school, small family, everything just very traditional, mainstream, like American kind of lifestyle. And I feel like I grew up very, very different, like in the country, a big family. My mom had home births, we homeschooled, very outside of the traditional box, I guess you could say. And
Mm-hmm.
so that we definitely kind of came into it with, I guess, different expectations, maybe like thinking about, um, you know, home birth and, or just like children, like, birth, I guess, in general. My husband didn't really, it was very unfamiliar for him, but he was just, I guess, just kind of would have assumed we would just do things mainstream. But I felt very, because I had seen my mom have the 4 home births, my sister, who's just younger than I, we got to be part of those births in different, obviously in more ways as we got older, because my youngest sister is like 14 and a half years younger than me, actually, to the day, which is
Whoa.
kind of funny. And so obviously that involvement, I guess you could say, like, grew. So we kind of just went into getting pregnant and like all of that. And I knew that I wanted to have a home birth. And so thankfully my husband is very, even though it was different for him, he was very willing to learn, because I think he knew like how important it was to me that I wanted to have a home birth, because for me that was the norm, because that's what I grew up seeing my
Mm.
mom do. And so that's what
Mm-hmm.
in my mind felt normal. It felt the most comfortable for me, because that was my frame of reference for birth, honestly. So
Mm-hmm.
we just kind of started like looking around, found a midwife that was in our area, and it just kind of that's just kind of how things started for me, I guess, like, with home birth. And it's just, oh, so thankful that I was able to do it.
Wow, yeah. Praise the Most High, because yeah, a lot of times you hear about, husbands being really strong about what they want, what they feel is the safest thing. It's not that they're
Mm-hmm,
wrong, that's what they grew up knowing, like how you said, and
mm-hmm.
that's their safety net. They're so worried about you and their child, and they just want, whatever the safest thing is. And for a lot of people, in general, even women, not just our husbands, but that's the safe place. And if you can make
Yeah.
that your safe place and have the birth that you want to have, then more power to you. But for me
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
personally, that's not my safe place.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Place.
think too, like, a big thing is just, if your husband is um concerned, I think, like, just standing strong in what you feel like. If you really feel like you want a home birth, standing strong in that, but giving, I feel like guys are so facts driven. So if you can give them information, like interview a midwife maybe together, read a book, listen to podcasts, whatever, learn the stats, those kinds of things, I think can help bring down those um, barriers, I guess, and just make it
Yeah.
seem more possible, and just understanding. I think a lot of times the reasons why we say no to things is because we just don't understand. Maybe it's new for us, or we don't have that personal frame of reference for, home birth, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
But just as much as we can have that open communication and just learn, I think can really help us to have a better understanding for each other when it comes to these kinds of things.
Yeah, just like that re-education, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
re-educating ourselves on what exactly is birth, what it looks like in, different scenarios and different places, even different cultures. Like you guys
Mm-hmm.
probably saw a lot of that in the different places that you've lived so far.
Mm-hmm.
But what other things did you do for your pregnancy and like preparation that were kind of like out of the norm, let's say?
Yeah. So I feel like all of my births have been so wildly different. And so
Yeah.
with my first, we found a midwife that just through word of mouth, we went with her. She was really sweet. My first birth was actually, I don't know if you know this, but it ended up being, so Emmett, our first, was born at home, but I ended up being transferred to the hospital immediately after he was born because I just tore so badly and ended up having to go and be
Oh,
like stitched up and get like blood transfusions. And it was kind of a really traumatic um experience, honestly.
yeah.
But that was, it was just like what God was there, and it was so gracious, and everything ended up being okay. And we lived very close to the hospital, and so it just, I was able to be taken care of and was able to come home within like 24 hours. And but interestingly enough, like even after that, I still knew that I wanted to continue to have home births for future children. So we
Hmm.
ended up, when I got pregnant with Gideon, like our second son, we ended up going with a different midwife that time. And it's just interesting. I think that God is so gracious and like meets us like in each of like with what we need as we are just like seeking him and just doing the best we can to make the best decisions we can in the moment. He just always is so faithful to provide. And so, that midwife that we had for our first birth was just what we needed, like for that birth. And then we had another midwife for Gideon's birth, and it was just amazing. My second home birth was just so redemptive, so straightforward, so it was just such a different experience. I had no tearing. It was just night and day difference. And I feel like God
Ah,
really use that to just so redemptive. And just to know, just because we walk through hard, I mean, just with anything in life, but especially when it comes to birth, just walking through hard things the first time doesn't mean that has to define the rest of our story when it comes to like home
yeah.
birth or childbirth just in general. And so that was just it was such a shorter labor. He was born in the water, like it happened so fast, like that we didn't even have time to blow up the tub and like anything. So he was born, like we were able to just fill up the bathtub and I got in the tub and he was born there. And it was just an awesome water birth. And it was just so, like I said, straightforward, so redemptive. And then we ended up moving to California. We were living in San Diego when I got pregnant with Lakeland, our third baby, and had, obviously another midwife. And that again was just exactly what I needed. Such an amazing birth team. She was born at home, also did a water birth with her. Um, and it was great. Again, just like everything that we needed in that moment. It was just so, all of my labors have kind of gotten, or deliveries have gotten quicker each time, which has been amazing. But when I got pregnant so then I had my first miscarriage just a little over a year ago.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry
And
about
that
that.
just was, oh, thank you. Yeah, it was such one of those things that, I mean, just like with anything, that when we walk through
Mm,
hard things in life, none of us would ever choose those things. We never would be like, wow, I'm going to
no,
sign up for this hardship. But it is, again, God's like
no.
faithfulness and just meeting me in that and bringing so much, I don't know, just teaching me so much and meeting me like in a really special way, like in that. And so then when I got pregnant a few months later with Everly, our baby right now, obviously had to work through so much fear and just all of that stuff like in my mind, after going through that miscarriage. And we're obviously living in Mexico, and so trying to navigate all of that, and deciding I knew I wanted to have a home birth, and we just didn't have great options that felt good for me. And I think that's something I always want to like encourage moms too, that it's like it's okay to make choices, to put yourself in a situation where you feel safe, where you feel like your birth plan is going to be what you need. And that's different for everyone, right? And so it's okay if that looks different than
Yeah.
the norm, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
anyway, through my pregnancy and leading up to my birth with Everly, we ended up deciding to go back to San Diego to have the same midwife who I had with Lakeland, with my home birth in San Diego. And we ended up having to get an Airbnb, and that's like a whole story in and of itself. But in speaking of preparation, I guess leading back this whole long story to say, back to your question about preparing, I feel like with Everly's pregnancy, it was the first time that I really kind of took time to really learn more. I think maybe because home birth was the norm, and I had gone to 4 of my mom's home births, and I kind of went into my first few births just like, oh, I just know this is normal for me, and so I'm just gonna kind of just wing it and do it. But finally,
Mm-hmm.
5th baby around, I'm like, maybe I should read some books or like start like kind of learning things. And it was amazing. And again, just what I needed for her birth and just for that experience. And it was, again, redemptive and healing in so many ways, like after a miscarriage. But learning more about, the fine details of like what our body's doing, like in labor. I know that sounds so silly, like on my like 5th time around, but was so amazing. Like just taking that time to kind of learn more and understand. And I read a couple books that like totally changed like everything. So the first one was Christ-centered childbirth. A friend of mine who has had multiple home births recommended that one. That was amazing, just like from a Christian perspective and like from scripture, like how we can support our mind,
Mm-hmm.
body, and spirit through God's word, and just from that perspective. So Christ-centered childbirth, and then supernatural childbirth. A friend recommended that. And again, just taking scripture and thinking through birth and babies and pregnancy and all of that in light of living under the new covenant, and all of that was like totally blew my mind and just led to like
That's
such an
amazing.
amazing, like my best birth experience ever. So
I can link to those books for anybody listening in the episode notes. So just scroll into the notes and you can find those books, and I'll link them. Oh, so those 2 books. And was there anything else that like you that you did or prepared in your like
yeah,
educating yourself about birth
yeah,
again?
yeah. It's so wild. And I think this is something I just want to encourage moms too, is it's like, just sometimes I think we can get so hung up on like, oh, something disappointing happened, because we can make our plans, and then there's always so many factors that play into life in general, but especially when it comes to birth and delivery. And I think it's just has been freeing for me to just let God take me on this journey of
Mm.
every experience can be different, can be redemptive, can be healing, and we're not like, he's never done, and just because there's been hard things in parts of our story or in past labors, deliveries, pregnancies, that doesn't have to define the rest of our story. And so just kind of being opening myself up to just whatever God wants to do in this pregnancy, in this labor, in this delivery, has just been, it's just been such a like cool experience for me. So those 2 books were huge. I also found there's a lady, her name is Karen Walton, and she runs an Instagram account called Pain Free Birth, I think is the name of it. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
she just shares so many amazing stories. I think that was a huge thing too. Like just, sometimes everybody always wants to share like, well, let me tell you about my traumatic birth story or how terrible this happened for me. And I think like it's really okay and important that we guard our mental space and the things that we're allowing in as we're preparing for pregnancy and delivery and birth. And so filling my mind with stories of wonderful home births, supernatural, amazing experiences, and letting my mind I guess just embrace that idea, like birth is natural, birth is normal, all these good experiences, I think was so good for my mindset, because we know that pregnancy, birth, labor is so much in our mind, right? It's kind of like that quote that says,
Yeah.
whether you think you can or think you can't, either way, you're right. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
really plays into birth so much. If we're going into it without, this is going to be so hard, this is going to be so painful, this is going to be the like most, oh, I'm just dreading this, then that affects our physical body so much. And that's just so important that we're in that relaxed
Yeah.
place, ready to accept what's going to happen like in birth. So surrounding myself with those like really positive stories on that Instagram account. And then another thing that was really huge too was putting together a worship playlist. I had never really done this before for my
Oh,
other
yeah.
births. And so as throughout pregnancy, as I was having these, I would be listening and I'd hear this song. I'm like, oh, this one like really like speaks to me, adding that to that list. And then I shared the playlist with my husband, and then we would like play it together, like just in the house, like leading up to as I was waiting to go into labor. And I feel like that, and just visualizing and thinking about like how amazing it's going to be to worship in birth, and all of that was just for me something that was such a sweet way of preparing between like me and God, and then even my husband and I
Yeah.
together. And just that kind of co-laboring together was just something that I feel like was really impactful for me that I had never done before.
That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. Like preparing spiritually is like a game changer. I
Mm-hmm.
remember especially for my first, I was, well, I was freshly atheist to believer. So then,
Wow.
actually it was my husband that was into home birth and vegan and all that stuff. So he was kind of helping me transition from all that traditional mainstream, all
Uh-huh.
that to like all this like natural
Wow.
birthing and things like that. So yeah, that
Wow.
was a
That's
big change
amazing.
for me. But one of the
Yeah.
verses, well, I guess it was two verses that I smashed together was like fearfully and wonderfully made to be, and
Mm-hmm.
then to be fruitful and multiply. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
repeating that to myself, like I was made for this. Like I have to
Yeah.
trust that the Most High made my body to do this, but also taking
Mm-hmm.
care of myself and my temple to be able
Mm-hmm.
to do this. And like you said, like educating myself, like re-educating myself about birth because
Mm-hmm.
I never knew about home birth. So that's
Mm-hmm.
amazing that you went through that. But one of the things that you talked about was the trauma of the postpartum of your first. And I was curious, like, did you do like a spiritual work or preparation to have your second home birth after that happened? Because you said it was traumatizing.
Yeah.
So, and of course you're like taken to the hospital emergency, that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
scary. Like, how were you
Yeah.
able to overcome that to have your second home birth?
Yeah. I think that again, because I think I'm just so thankful to my mom, because I feel like the gift of having been able to watch her go through 4 home births again just really solidified in my mind, like it's like that it
Mm,
wasn't the home birth's fault that happened. Does that make sense? I
yeah.
think sometimes people, when if they go through something hard, or maybe things don't go the way they planned with a home birth or whatever, it can be so easy to fall into like, oh, I should have been. And of course, everyone's
Mm,
situation, every person can only make that decision for themselves, whether you should be doing a home birth or a hospital birth. But I think it can be so easy to fall into that trap of just, oh, if I wouldn't have been here, that wouldn't have happened. And I think just kind of understanding and accepting that for my situation, there really was there really was nothing, like the midwife and I just did the best that I could in that situation. And honestly, I think if I had been in a hospital, I think I probably would have ended up with a C-section, just because Emmett's head was so huge. And I think that's just why I tore. He was just like a very big baby and very broad shoulders, all of that. And I honestly think it probably would have ended in a C-section had I been in the hospital. And so just kind of like being like, wow, you know, there's no, once things happen, right? There's nothing we can go back to undo those things. And so I think just
mm,
accepting, like, wow, I'm really thankful that God was faithful and orchestrated it, and I was able to give birth to him naturally, and then I was able to be cared for with that emergency care that I needed, and just focusing on the things
yeah,
that
true.
I was grateful for, and how God like came through and provided, and he was so present. And then I think again, just choosing not, as I went into my second pregnancy, and then thinking like, for sure there was that, if I took time to dwell on how scary that was or whatever, like, for sure it was like, wow, I felt those feelings of fear. But I think it's like
Hmm.
we have so much power through the Holy Spirit to make that conscientious decision that I'm not going to just continue to rehash that and dwell on that and just keep replaying that over and over in my mind, just releasing that and just speaking life, speaking truth, over myself, speaking
Mm.
scriptures. There's no fear in love, perfect love casts out fear. All of those things, I think, were helpful for
Yeah,
me
that's
just to
powerful for
release
sure.
it and just to continue to move forward. And again, I'm like so thankful, by the grace of God, I was able to have this amazing. Gideon's birth was like, it was so straightforward. I went into labor. It was early. I thought my due date was off. And so it was like completely unexpected. We had been at like a friend's house for like a small group. And I'm like, wow, I think I'm having contractions. Like, this is crazy. Cause I was 2 weeks over with Emmett, our first. And so I fully expected like, oh, I just have so much pregnancy still to go. And just going into labor and that night. And I remember we left from our friend's house and I'm like, I think I'm having contractions. Like, this is so weird. And we were standing outside and I remember so clearly her just saying like, wow, she's like, is today a good day or she's like, is tonight a good night to have a baby? And I was like, yes, like, and she just stood there and we stood outside her house and she just prayed for me. And I got in the car and we drove home, and literally within I think it was within 6 hours, I think, after that, we had like a baby in our arms. Like, it was just so crazy. And so, just amazing, like how God just totally redeemed that. It was, and again, no tearing, so straightforward. And it's just, I think we just have to choose it, we choose that faith or we choose that fear, and
Yeah.
just choosing to move forward in belief that the best is still coming. I think for me was
Hmm.
just so helpful.
Oh, did you do anything like to prepare like physically like your perineum so that you wouldn't tear again?
I didn't really. I don't. I think in my mind I just was like, the first one paves the way, kind of. And I think I really didn't do anything different. I mean, it probably would have been good, but I just yeah, I didn't really. That's not helpful at all.
Okay.
um,
No.
but yeah,
Well, whatever you did and your body, yeah, you were right. So it worked out
yeah,
anyway. So
yes,
one of the things that
yes.
I love that you keep bringing up is like your experience before your own birth with home birth with your mom and everything. Because
Hmm.
one of my favorite childbirth education is birthing from within, and one of the
Hmm.
parts of the courses that we take or that we talk a lot about as doulas is our first birth stories that we ever tell ourselves or birth stories that we experience
Hmm.
or see. And they have like one of the greatest impacts on us subconsciously
Wow.
about how we see birth and how we experience birth.
Mm.
And it's a great way to, experience a different type of childbirth education because
Hmm.
you're digging deep into your own thoughts and beliefs about birth based upon the first birth stories you ever saw or heard. So like
Hmm.
my first birth story that was my mom, I was her VBAC. So she was
Mm.
always so proud of talking about that because that was
Wow.
redemptive for her. So I was her VBAC. And then my
Mm.
my sister is also a lot younger than me. She's 9 years younger. You said your sister's like 13 years younger than you. So
Yeah, 14. Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah, so I got to see my sister be born, again,
Wow.
naturally in a hospital. Yeah, but still it was very redemptive
Hmm.
for my mom as well, So when I got to see it, so I don't know. Yeah, I was raised like with traditional, beliefs about
Hmm.
birth and everything, but at the same time, like just seeing that and after learning about that, obviously in the childbirth classes, I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that makes so much sense,
Yeah. Well,
especially
honestly,
not
it's
being
like,
raised Christian or anything. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. But no, I was just gonna say, I think that, I mean, okay, we know anything that Hollywood does is not at all a depiction of true life, but I feel like
Yeah,
or
if
just
that's the
reality,
first
but
thing
I
you
feel
see,
like when you watch the movies for childbirth, I'm like, that it is nothing like in the movies, like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, my water broke. We gotta get to the hospital. Like, I'm like, that is so, it's such a very much over dramatized. But if you think about it, this is like something that just really shook me, that I was talking with a friend recently. It's
Hey, it's me, just taking a quick sec to let you know about the Pink Premium Access. Get the link for access in the show notes or heavenlytreasure.net, where you can choose monthly or yearly access options. You will get all the uncut gems hidden from the Salt podcast, plus exclusive episodes, promos from guests, Ask Me Anything episodes, and private group Zoom calls for Access members only. Sorry to hide these next gems from you. See you in the pink premium, and thanks for helping me keep the show alive and running. What other things have you thought of, like resources or anything that would be good for women to look into, maybe that have never even thought to have a home birth?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I feel like those two books, the Supernatural Childbirth and then Christ-Centered Childbirth, those were two amazing books. I think that first 40 days, that book was amazing for me. Just understanding if this whole concept of postpartum rest and extended like time of healing if that's like totally new for you and not the norm, I feel like that book is amazing. It's full of incredible recipes and things that is just an amazing resource. There's also, and I'll send you the link for this, there's an amazing group on Facebook called it's like Christian home birth assisted and unassisted, and that was like another resource. It was just a lot of other women that are believers who have this vision and desire just for embracing natural childbirth and home birth. And I think there's just so much power in surrounding ourselves with people who are seeking after that same thing, right? I think if we are surrounding ourselves with the voices of people who are like, no, that's so dangerous. Like, why would you think that's going to get in our mind and make us doubt what God could really have for us? And so that was something too, that was just being in that group, as I was, being overdue and just trying to like trust that, God had a plan and that my body can do this, is just surrounding myself with those encouraging voices, even if it was just women on the internet, that I didn't necessarily know, was just really encouraging for me. And then I think also that pain-free birth account that Karen Walton, that was another really great resource as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'll be sure to put all those links in the episode notes. So before we close out, do you have any like last thoughts or encouragement to women?
Yeah, I think I just want, I think as I talk, on Instagram a lot just about birth and just especially my last experience with Everly's birth, knowing that really at the end of the day, whatever kind of birth you choose, if it's a home birth, if it's a natural birth in the hospital, I have a friend who she's actually pregnant with her 6th baby right now. She's had twins. She's amazing. And she chooses to, give birth in the hospital because she's had 2 different C-sections. And for her, that's where she feels the safest. But she is so bold to stand up for what she desires in birth, even in the hospital. And I just think I think that's just my heart for women, is it doesn't matter where you choose to give birth. Obviously, I think home birth is amazing and an incredible experience that everyone should just at least look into. But no matter what you choose, just knowing that, God has made our bodies as women to do this. Like, this is a huge part of what we were created to do. Not the only thing, but a huge part of it, to give life to the next generation and to sustain that life, and just to trust and believe that God has given us everything that we need and he has created us for this. And then just to not be afraid to speak up for the things that matter to you, and to ask those questions and to kind of seek after that experience that you're desiring, that is natural childbirth. And I think there's just, it's so possible for everyone.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Oh, last thing, where can people find you? Like, do you have your Instagram account? What's your name and your website, or where's the best place people can find you?
Pretty simple. I'm most active on Instagram, just my name, Nicole Neesby. I also have a blog that I'm working on getting kind of revamped, but it's just NicoleNeesby.com. So, but Instagram and Instagram stories is my main place where I hang out.
Yeah, I love it. I love following you. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and share your amazing insight and wisdom and love for the Most High and what he's done for you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, friend.
Thanks for listening in. Be sure to hit subscribe and visit heavenlytreasure.net for more. See see you on IG at Heavenly Treasure Living. Till next time, blessings, and remember to be the salt of the earth.